So starting at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday, people will no longer be able to enter the United States from Afghanistan, Burma, Chad, Republic of the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. There will also be heightened restrictions on visitors from Burundi, Cuba, Laos, Sierra Leone, Togo, Turkmenistan, and Venezuela. The first time Trump instituted a travel ban just a week into his first term, his reasonings were incredibly clear. I mean, the nations he banned had predominantly Muslim populations. On the campaign trail just the year before, Trump called for a, quote, total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. Trump's own advisors referred to the travel ban as a Muslim ban. That first travel ban was blocked by the courts in a week's time. But Trump tried again and again with multiple subsequent travel bans, which were also adjudicated all the way up to the Supreme Court, where the High Court ultimately gave Trump the okay to enact his ban. I was just talking with Miles Taylor about this. Now we find ourselves here again. Trump has once again banned travel from a long list of countries. And while not all of them are predominantly Muslim, a lot of them are in Africa. There are some themes here for sure. Joining me now is Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. Thank you for being here with me. I was just saying to you, I love having you on always, but because I can talk to you about any topic, no matter what the breaking news is. So let me start.
On the gamut.
Right. What's old is new again in some ways. I mean, I started the show talking in depth about the bill, the big ugly bill, which we will definitely talk about, which we cannot be distracted from. But I also just want to spend a moment so people understand this too. So the travel ban is set to go into effect at 12:01 on Monday. You're very familiar on the Judiciary Committee. Do you think there could be legal challenges that could prevent that from happening?
Of course there will be. I remember the last time we had adopted kids. I remember one mom, I finally got the ambassador to make an exception for a kid that was actually coming from Lebanon. Yeah. And she put a little flag sweater on because she thought it might help on the airplane. And that kid is now in Minnesota doing incredibly well. But this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about, I looked at some of the countries. Yeah. Our state thrives on refugees. We have one of the biggest Hmong population. They're obviously not on the list, but we have a big Liberian population. We have a big Somali population. It's part of the fabric of life in our state. And as someone who leads the Afghan Adjustment Bill, which is a bipartisan piece of legislation, the thought that we would just ban people, no matter what their circumstances across the board, as opposed to doing what grown-up countries do, which is vet. We vet people regardless of country, because you never know where someone's going to come in that you don't want to have come in our country. Our job is to vet them when they come from these nations, not to do across-the-board bans. In the case of the Afghans, we still have people hiding in that country that stood with our soldiers and saved their lives. We have people here that they have not decided to protect yet, who literally, their best advocates are American soldiers who owe their lives to them, who were there. They were their interpreters. They gathered intel for them. Their families are at great risk. I just use that example of all the countries on the list because, say, sending them back or leaving them where they are, putting them in the hands of the Taliban, that's what we're talking about here. So I think going after wholesale people who come in as refugees is a mistake for our economy. Yeah. It is a mistake for our security, and it is obviously a moral issue for me.
Me as well. I mean, Trump cited the recent terror attack in Boulder, Colorado, in a video he posted to X tonight. And the suspect in that attack is an Egyptian national. Egypt is not a country listed in tonight's travel ban, which tells you, I think, almost everything. Even his own explanation doesn't make sense in the countries.
Don't worry about reaching for a pen and paper today. Today's show comes with all of your math homework done for you by us. Not that it's a particularly difficult bit of arithmetic either, which is the whole point, because today, on day 54 of our 90 Deals in 90 Days tracker, Donald Trump isn't remotely halfway there. Be generous and give him half of 1 point for a framework of a deal with the UK, and we'll give him a point for achieving a preliminary one with China, although there's trouble on that front to tell you about as well today. And Trump is just past his own 1 yard line, 1/90th of the way there. To put it bluntly, this is not a game. It's a gamble and a bad bet, to hear some economists talk about it, staking our very livelihoods and those of our children on reforging global trade using possibly illegal tariffs. As of today, the rates for steel and aluminum imports are now officially doubled up to 50% now. Well, the White House went about evaluating final offers, whatever that means, from other countries on this self-imposed deadline day. And who knows, maybe today's the day. Maybe by the time we're off the air, there will be some real agreements and deals signed on paper, and they'll announce them. Maybe we'll even see that, quote, cascade that Peter Navarro promised. He's the aide who coined the, quote, 90 deals in 90 days promise. Or maybe they'll find that it's more difficult than that. Just this morning, Donald Trump was posting on social media about just how hard it is to make a deal with China's President Xi. A notable addendum to what Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said last week. The talks were, quote, a bit stalled with China. Politico reporting this, quote, Trump thinks a call with Xi will help reset souring trade talks. But even if that conversation happens this week, as the White House said is likely, it is doubtful to be the breakthrough Trump is hoping for. Quote, the president is obsessed with having a call with Xi, said one person familiar with the trade talks, convinced he can personally hash out deep-seated divisions between the world's two largest economies mano a mano with Xi. Again, the stakes don't get much higher than this, especially when you consider what Trump's allies are preparing to do to millions of Americans right here at home. That big, whatever we want to call it, not so beautiful bill. That confluence is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. NPR's chief economics correspondent, Scott Horsley, is here. Also joining us, former senior advisor to President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Former New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu's back. And MSNBC political analyst, host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller, is here. I want to start with the calamitous state of no deals in 90 days, or we'll give him 1.5 deals in 90 days. Scott, is there any shift in the language or any? I mean, I know that the White House feels that it has its base so completely captive on all results, but they are still on the record as of today promising 90 units of something for which they have one.
Right. And they're trying to up the pressure on the trading partners today. This was sort of the deadline for all the other countries to come in with their best offer for a trade deal. It's interesting. The Congressional Budget Office came out today with a forecast of how much money they think the tariffs are going to raise over the next decade. And they projected that the tariffs that were in place yesterday would be made permanent over the next 10 years. Well, nothing over the last couple of months suggests that these tariffs are going to be anything like permanent over the next 10 years. They've gone up and down like a yo-yo. So how much bargaining pressure there really is on these other countries to come through with a deal is up in the air.
I want to ask about the impact of ignorance on negotiations. This is the Commerce Secretary talking to Senator Kennedy about sort of a pretty basic element of trade policy.
If Vietnam, for example, came to you tomorrow and said, okay, Mr. Secretary, you win. We're going to remove all tariffs and all trade barriers. Would the United States please do the same? Would you accept that deal?
Absolutely not. Okay. Absolutely not. That would be the silliest thing we could do.
What's the purpose of reciprocity then? Is reciprocity not one of your goals? Are you telling the president that we shouldn't seek reciprocity? If that's what you're telling him, why are you trying to do these trade deals?
What do we want? We want to encourage Vietnam to produce products they're great at producing.
But I want to get back to reciprocity. You just said you don't believe in it. You don't accept reciprocity as a goal. What are you negotiating in these trade deals?
Why would we open our bank account and their bank account when ours is 10 times bigger?
Why are you negotiating trade deals? You're trying to get other countries to lower their tariffs and trade barriers in return for us lowering ours.
That's true for the things that they'll take from us.
That's called reciprocity.
Of course.
So I want to be really precise here. I'm not trying to stupid shame anybody, especially not the only Secretary of Commerce that the United States of America has right now. And he might be really smart at other stuff, but he obviously doesn't know jack you know what about trade. This is the person in charge of the deals?
Well, Senator Kennedy is advancing what has been the standard U.S. position for decades, which is that we have historically been a country of low trade barriers, and we have encouraged other countries to lower their trade barriers. Donald Trump and his cabinet have adopted pretty much the opposite position, which is that we're going to raise our trade barriers and almost by default encourage other countries to raise theirs in response. And we're now sitting on the highest trade barriers in the U.S., the highest tariff levels in the United States since the Great Depression.
Yeah, I mean, and Mitch, I want to bring you in on this. I think that to pursue policies that history shows are foolish and devastating and damaging is one scandal. We've kept a close eye on that. To pursue policies that history shows are devastating and damaging are one of the factors that precede catastrophic foreign events like wars. From someone who has no idea what he's doing is an even larger scandal, it would appear.
Well, first of all, John Kennedy, who has proven to be one of the most conservative senators and a huge Trump supporter, was trying to help the secretary out. Trump himself has said many, many times, would love to get to 0-0. So what should be clear now to everybody is there is no strategy. They don't know what they're doing. They're not on the same page. They're in opposite of each other, depending on what time of any day it happens to be. So Americans could, conclude that there is no plan. Look, my wife and I have 5 kids. We often say to our kids, bad decisions equal bad consequences. The decision to get into a trade war when there wasn't one before was a bad decision. And the consequence has been that today, I think the effective tariff rate is 22%, that even though we're not at 145%, Americans are paying somewhere between 10 and 22% more than they paid when Donald Trump went into office. So just think about going to the store and getting a loaf of bread, or buying chips or buying food for your family, and you're paying a 10% tax or a 22% tax on that. Everything is going up. It's not going down. And Donald Trump ran for office and said that his primary mission for running was to lower costs for working folks. And all he has done since he's been in office, besides mess everything up, is to raise prices, cut health care, make it harder for folks to live. And I just think it's not going to end well, besides the fact that they don't even have a deal yet, other than the one out of the 99 that they said they were going to have. So they're not even good at being bad at this point in time.
Tim, I know we're in a news cycle that blurs bias, right? And just so distorts so many things. But can we just freeze frame on Mr. Lutnick for a second? Because it's just an interesting window into how Trump has no standards. Trump ran the first time. Part of the appeal was he would bring in the best people. When you saw Mattis, you were like, oh, okay, maybe some of these people are really going to save us from whatever Trump doesn't know. Not what he did this time. Mr. Lutnick talked about, he's one of the richest people to ever serve in a cabinet, talked about his mother-in-law missing a Social Security check and being one of those good people who would never complain about it. Now he's making clear I don't know that there are many more MAGA members in the Senate than Kennedy, that he has no idea what the basic principles of trade are. And he's one of the people in charge of negotiating trade deals. In normal times, what sort of response should that elicit?
Yeah, it's good to sit on Lutnick because he is the most incompetent member of the cabinet in what is a pretty competitive category. And he's doing it by a wide margin. And and even people inside the Trump administration will say that. So that's not even those of us who are Trump opponents who are saying it. They were pointing fingers at Lutnick all the way back in February in blind quotes and Politico and other news outlets like that. So, he does not know what he's doing. But I think it's important that exchange was very revealing between him and Kennedy in another way that I just want to tease out, because we're looking at two kind of different types of dumb there. Like Lutnick doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to tariffs. So making him the point man for it just because he was willing to suck up to Trump the hardest was a really dumb decision. And he's advancing very dumb policy, which is these tariffs, like you've mentioned, which there's plenty of historical record to show how it will damage the economy. But Kennedy there, who is trying, as I think Mitch pointed out, to nudge him the direction to a smarter policy, was revealing a kind of lack of savvy himself. Because John Kennedy doesn't seem to understand the policies that the candidate that he supported was going to implement. Because this idea, this pretense, like he seems to have convinced himself of this lie that some Republicans told Wall Street Journal voters in order to get them to vote for Trump, that like Trump has a desire to lower trade barriers and to lower tariffs, and that's the point of this, to get to some great deal at the end. But that's not the plan. Anybody that listens to Donald Trump knows that's not the plan. And John Kennedy has been whole hog signed up on the Donald Trump bandwagon, pushing him and promoting him and trying to get him elected so that he could implement this tariff policy that John Kennedy knows is terrible. So to me, like, that's a different kind of stupid, but it's stupid in its own right.
We begin with what is truly disarray in the Republican Party. And if you do normal math, it's supposed to be the ongoing honeymoon period. They did win the White House and the Congress, but they're sure having a hard time staying on point together. Republican leaders are pretty openly, publicly kind of panicking because Elon Musk, who is the largest donor to Donald Trump and until last week an ally of his, is basically trying to kill their big bill, trashing Trump's signature biggest economic priority for legislation again today, and continuing with what he's been saying this week, that it is not just a bad bill or a difference of opinion and ideas, but rather that Musk says Trump's bill is a, quote, disgusting abomination. And there are signs that this is more than a spat, even though it may be a spat, that it's more than White House intrigue, though it includes the intrigue of two men who claimed to work together so well and claimed in that goodbye press conference where Musk explained why he had a black eye and why he was leaving and other various developments where they claimed they'd be working together and see eye to eye on a lot of stuff. That's not the case. It's more than that because this could sink the bill. Musk clearly wanting to show his power and what he's upset with Donald Trump about and focusing on something Trump actually wants to pass when there aren't many votes to spare. Now, there has been a dozen posts by Musk on the platform that he bought where he can always turn up the volume for himself, which, of course, cuts against his free speech claims of it being a fair and free market for speech, that he said he would do that. But no, he can do that now legally. And he has been railing against the Trump bill. Just late today here, as we were preparing to come on the air on The Beat, Musk said that you want to go ahead and kill this bill. And like Donald Trump, they both know how to tap into memes and culture. And you can see the clear reference to that Tarantino classic, Kill Bill. He has also, we've seen other users having fun with this. And again, I'm showing you this because this is part of the online conversation on X, which still matters a lot to people on the American right, even if others have abandoned it. We see the imagined idea of Elon Musk killing the bill, which is a lot of people at least having fun, if not getting behind the policy idea here that maybe this Trump bill should not pass. Trump is upset. Irked is the word in the Axios reporting, while at Politico, they say this quick disloyalty has angered the White House. One official saying the West Wing is perplexed, unenthused, and disappointed with Musk. Another Musk post is rattling Republicans, where he vows that by next year in November, they will fire all politicians who betrayed the American people. As with any other words from any political figure or business mogul like Musk, what he says doesn't mean he's going to do it. He said a lot about cutting more than he cut. But if you are a Republican in a district where a few million makes a big difference and costs him basically nothing, to him that's a give a penny, take a penny jar, yeah, you're going to notice that. None of this is helping House Republicans get unified. They had a closed-door meeting today, and the Speaker spoke to the threat, seeking to, quote, reassure Republicans worried that Musk could come in and primary them. And again, you can be in a red district, but if Elon Musk throws millions in a primary for some other conservative MAGA-type Republican, well, you could lose even though you have a lot of Republicans in your district. So the threat is real. The fear is real. Publicly, the Speaker is just pleading with Musk to engage, to get back to him. It even has a kind of a sad Mean Girls feeling where the Speaker of the House, an important job, is, I guess, not important enough to get the return call.
I called Elon last night and he didn't answer, but I hope to talk to him today. I'd love to talk to him this week and hope he calls him back today.
I haven't spoken to him yet. I've been a little busy, but I left him a message. I know. Trying to connect.
She'd be like, why didn't you call me back? And I'd be like, why are you so obsessed with me?
Why don't you call me back? And why are you telling the whole Washington press corps about it more than once? The political reason is obvious. Speaker Johnson is a politician. And whatever vanity or ego one might have about not seeming important enough, the larger ego is he wants to do anything he can in a private phone call or a public sign to try to warm up to Musk, because this is a person who, even after leaving the White House, might be able to flip a couple votes. And if it comes to the House, if they come up with one big, beautiful bill that is coming out of conference and the House has to pass it, Speaker can't afford to lose a couple votes to Elon Musk. The feud has also riveted America, partly because it's easy to follow, right? Some of the Doge cuts, some of the other things we've been following in the rule of law arena are slow and complicated, important. But this one, just like the Mean Girls episode reference, this one anyone can get. And so the comics, the late night comics, are having a field day.
Trump versus Elon, what an unexpected, I'm not sure who to root for. It's like Diddy versus R. Kelly.
Elon Musk is now blasting President Trump's big, beautiful bill as a disgusting abomination. Yeah, and that's coming from the guy who made the Cybertruck.
Elon has to be careful. You come out that hard against Trump's central legislative achievement, and you're going to be the first white person to get deported.
On and on it goes, some of it quite personal, some of it not actually about what's in this bill. And there are a lot of different things in this bill. We don't really know whether it is majority policy that's concerning Musk or majority personal, given this big breakup they just had. We do know that a lot of what's in the bill is unpopular, and that means it's harder to sell if you have more incoming attacks and more time of people hearing about it. They could hear that it grows the deficit, which traditional conservatives say they don't want to do. They could hear that a lot of the money comes out of the tax coffers and goes towards multimillionaires who don't exactly need much help right now after this season of high prices and inflation and tariffs. A lot of regular people who have regular jobs and don't have millions earning interest have other concerns than sending that money to the super rich. And there's a lot of elements that would slash health care. 9 million people could lose health care. So I want to remind you the policy matters here. And if people hear more about that, that might hurt the Trump effort, which is interesting because now some Republicans seeing this opening that a big, super recently MAGA person is also attacking the bill has opened up a lane to agree with parts of Musk's takedown.
What do you make of Elon Musk criticizing the one big beautiful bill?
Well, you know, I have to agree with him.
It's the most inefficient piece of crap I've ever seen. I mean, it really is a horrible, horrible bill.
Does what Elon said give you additional kind of help in your quest on this?
Yeah, it certainly bolsters our case. He was in the inside. He showed us with President Trump how to do this. You actually look at the numbers, take the personalities out of it, take the invective out of it, take the insults out of it. Look at the cold, hard facts.
Once this bill votes and this debt ceiling goes through, the debt is owned by the GOP, and there is no more campaigning and saying this is the Democrats. It will be owned by the Republicans, and I think that's a huge mistake.
Huge mistake, says Republican Rand Paul. They will own the debt. And boy, how much debt is it going to be? Over $2 trillion on the decade. That's according to the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. It's hard to take the word trillion and make it mean anything. A lot of us in journalism, we weren't necessarily that great at math. That's why we have this job. But over at HuffPo, they have the number of zeros it takes, right? I mean, it's just a massive amount of debt. Many people have pointed out that when you get to these high numbers of debt, the interest alone, servicing the debt, costs more than other important things like health care, which they're cutting, and even Pentagon spending. Which, again, if they just didn't do this, right, Musk is saying kill the bill. If they killed this bill, you wouldn't have this many zeros of debt. And that money could either be saved, if you're into just refunding it back to the taxpayer, or it could be put towards health care and other things. I mentioned that the estimates range. There's some estimates we've seen about 9 million going off health care. Others could be 16 million. It depends basically on whether you use the larger number of combining people losing Medicaid and the likely loss under whether it's hard or easier to be on the ACA, the Obamacare. There are others, including a 2025 architect, Project 2025, who's now serving as a budget official for Trump, who are getting grilled on the Hill from the concern. I just showed some of the Republican concern, the deficit concern, the Musk concern. There's also the concerns about this same bill coming at it from a different perspective, concern from the Democrats.
Candidly, Director Vogt, I think your agenda is a danger to our country.
You want a government so broken, so dysfunctional, so starved of resources, so full of incompetent political lackeys and bereft of experts and professionals that its departments and agencies cannot feasibly achieve the goals and the missions to which they are lawfully directed. Waste, fraud, and abuse are not the targets of this administration. They are your primary objectives.
That's how it's going down in Washington. Elon Musk was convinced he could be a very impactful, powerful ally of Donald Trump. It wasn't enough to give money and get something back. That's how a lot of transactional people approach politics. We've covered that and the sometimes alleged conflicts and double dealing of that. But it was more than that. He bought one of the largest platforms in politics that everybody knows about, Twitter, now X. He went out and personally campaigned, including this year, going out in a Wisconsin race that he lost. And he puffed himself up at the cabinet meetings and everywhere else. He wanted to prove how powerful he was. Here we are in a new week and inflection point in the second Trump term, and all of those things are still true, except in the other direction. He seems to want to prove how powerful he is also in stopping Trump priorities. Instead of supporting an economic agenda or helping write it with his so-called efficiency program, he now wants to stop it, or as he would say, kill it. Is he as powerful on the outside as he wanted to be on the inside? That's what we're all about to find out, along with whether this bill that affects so many people is going to be killed.
Just moments ago, President Trump posted on Truth Social that he spoke to his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, on the phone for more than an hour about his country's more than 3-year-long war with Ukraine. And Trump noted, quote, "It was a good conversation, but not a conversation that will lead to immediate peace." I want to bring in New York Times chief White House correspondent Peter Baker, who spent 4 years in Russia as the Washington Post Moscow's co-bureau chief. Always good to have you at times like these, Peter. I don't have to tell you that on the campaign trail, President Trump promised to end Russia's war with Ukraine as soon as he took office. Now he seems to be acknowledging it's not quite so easy. But I wonder what you read into both the length and what we know of the content of this phone call.
Yeah, not even as soon as he took office. He said he would do it before he took office. He said it was so easy he would get it done in 24 hours once he was elected. Of course, that didn't happen. And it has been a lot more difficult than he anticipated. And that's because it seems like Vladimir Putin doesn't want peace. If you have an aggressor, an invader, a country that sent its forces into the other country in order to conquer territory, and that aggressor is not ready for peace, it's awfully hard to negotiate a deal. And Vladimir Putin has given up no concessions that we can see, at least publicly, in these discussions. And it looks like Trump isn't really pushing at this point. What he said in that statement today was they spoke for more than an hour and 15 minutes, something like that. He says that it was a good conversation, as you showed in that clip, but not one that will lead to immediate peace. He said something very interesting in that he said that Putin described or discussed the Ukrainian attack on their strategic bombers that was carried out the last few days with drones, an extraordinary attack inside Russian territory, and that Putin said that they would have to respond to that. And it's very odd to see a president of the United States repeating a Russian threat against Ukraine, an American ally, without in any way addressing it one way or the other. He didn't say that they should. He didn't say they shouldn't. He simply said that that was a fact of life in effect, and he didn't warn them against it. He didn't actually, in the statement anyway, say anything about how Putin needs to de-escalate this conflict. Instead, he moved very quickly away from the Ukraine issue to Iran, where he says he thinks he can work with Vladimir Putin in order to create some sort of a nuclear deal. It seems almost as if he's washing his hands of Ukraine in order to buy some support for this other deal he wants to reach.
So there's also a very interesting statement about another phone call. The TASS news agency, which you know well, is reporting on a phone call between Vladimir Putin and the new Pope Leo. And a couple of interesting things. One is that, according to this readout, Putin drew his attention, meaning the Pope's attention, to the escalation of the conflict by the Kyiv regime, obviously referencing some of those surprise moves that have happened from the Ukrainians. But also, it says Putin expressed gratitude to Pope Leo for his willingness to assist in resolving the conflict. And the Russian leader confirmed his interest in achieving peace through political and diplomatic means. Is there, do you think, some kind of opening that could be provided by the Vatican as a site, by Pope Leo himself? Is there a level of respect from both of these men for the new Pope that might be able to move the ball forward?
Well, it's conceivable. We don't know much because we don't have a history with this Pope. He's new to the position, obviously. We haven't seen his willingness to play that kind of a role in an international situation. You did hear recently the Trump administration talk about maybe turning it over to the Pope, in effect, sending the responsibility for negotiating some sort of a peace to the Vatican and basically stepping back from that. I'm not sure where that came from, but it does suggest perhaps there has been some conversation about this, and maybe that's why the President Putin and the Pope spoke today, because there's been some discussion. It's something to watch, obviously. This is a Pope who's brand new to the job. We don't know what kind of role, what kind of a skill set he would bring to this particular negotiation if he were to try to involve himself. Traditionally, popes have encouraged peace, but haven't actually been the brokers of specific deals. And Vladimir Putin's made very clear he wants, before any fighting stops, to have very specific concessions from the Ukrainians and from the West. And I'm not sure whether the Pope would be in the position to deliver those or not.
Yeah, or whether you just bring some people together in a room. We don't know what exactly that means. Let me ask you finally about, because you touched on Iran, and that was the other thing that was discussed in this phone call between the two presidents. I mean, wasn't it just a couple of weeks ago there was some suggestion that they were close to making a deal? Are those talks falling apart? What do we know about where talks about Iran and the nuclear deal stand?
Well, they're hung up on a lot of the same things that were difficult in the last round during the Obama administration when they were trying to negotiate the deal that they eventually did sign and that Trump then threw out, what they call the JCPOA, which is a question of whether Iran gets to have any enrichment of uranium at all. You can enrich uranium for civilian purposes, and then you highly enrich it to make it possible for weapons-grade uranium. And the question is whether or not Iran should have any at all. The president has said, no, they shouldn't have any at all. But some of the discussion in these talks includes some sort of a temporary stage in which they would be able to allow to keep some level of enrichment. These are hard issues to negotiate. Iran is not willing to give up everything. Trump is demanding that they do give up everything. And so we'll see that the tone of today's message, today's social media post suggests a degree of skepticism that they're getting there. But on the other hand, it does seem to be his sort of number one overseas diplomatic priority at the moment.
Republicans have backed themselves into a political corner with their big, beautiful bill. In order to pay for their massive tax cuts for the wealthy and large corporations, they have to cut Medicaid or something else. But they've chosen to cut Medicaid. Cutting Medicaid is very unpopular, especially among the coalition of voters that now make up Donald Trump's base. And the way they're trying to wriggle out of this inconvenient truth is either to just lie about it, claim they're not cutting benefits, or in the case of Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, to admit they don't care if people are hurt. Well, we're all going to die, she says. Well, today we got an estimate from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, which says nearly 11 million people could lose their health insurance under this plan. That is roughly the population of the state of Georgia. Republicans can say whatever they want about the bill, and they will, but that's the reality they're facing. Senator Bernie Sanders, an independent of Vermont, the ranking member of the Health Committee, and he joins me now. Senator, it's good to have you on.
Thank you.
Your colleagues, your Republican colleagues, to the extent they're making an argument on this, but particularly in the House, I would say no one's going to lose. Like, basically, I think the argument is only immigrants or people that are kind of lazy and just don't want to work are going to be ones cut off of benefits, and you shouldn't worry about that.
Well, you should worry about it. The truth is, Chris, when they talk about a quote-unquote work requirement, understand that every year 20 million people in this country lose their jobs or change jobs and so forth. And for all of those people, many of them low-wage workers who are dependent upon Medicaid, they're going to have to fill out a dozen different forms. They're not going to do it. So the plan is to intentionally drive people, that is the goal, to drive people off of Medicaid so that they can save substantial sums of money, some $700 billion, and then transfer that to the wealthiest people in this country through massive tax breaks for the rich and very large corporations. And I should mention, as I think everybody knows, this comes on top of the fact that our current healthcare system is broken, it is dysfunctional. We got 85 million people already who are uninsured or underinsured. Many of them are working. This will only make a terrible situation even worse. And by the way, if I can say, it's not just individuals who are going to lose their health insurance. Medicaid pays about 60% of nursing home costs, which means that nursing homes that are struggling right now are going to suffer. Hospitals are going to suffer. It's kind of a massive impact on an already broken healthcare system.
We should also know one of the things in the CBO report, there's a bunch of things that Democrats did when they were in power, particularly in the American Rescue Plan, to shore up Obamacare and get more people in. In fact, the number that were insured grew every year under Biden, and that was because of policy mechanisms, which
I know about that. I helped write that bill.
Yes, exactly. Well, I'm explaining for the viewer, not for you. But the point being that should those expire, which they're set to, and I don't think they're going to re-up, that's another 5 million people. Like, there's other attacks on the system they're doing that are getting less attention, but that's another 5 million people, according to that CBO report today.
It's absolutely. It is beyond. It's totally unconscionable. And to do that, in order to give massive tax breaks to people today on the top who have never, ever had it so good, is beyond cruel. It is really almost unspeakable. But you know what, Chris? I mean, this whole issue touches on what Trumpism is really about. If you think about it, what Trumpism is about, it's, when he goes to Saudi Arabia and he loves this guy MBS, who is a murderer, killed a Washington Post journalist, but he's rich, and he can make a deal with him. Well, what this is all about is that if you're rich in America and you can make campaign contributions, you are entitled to massive tax breaks because you're superhuman beings. But if you're a poor working stiff going out, you're working in McDonald's, you're working in a factory, you're struggling to put food on the table, hey, you are entitled to nothing. We're going to cut not only health care in this bill, massive cuts in nutrition for kids, for elderly people, massive cuts in education, making it harder for kids to be able to attend college. That is what Trumpism is about for the superior people, the Elon Musks of the world, the people who are successful. We're going to make them more successful. You're a working stiff. You're entitled to nothing. And the other interesting element about this whole thing is, Elon Musk came out against it. See, he was offended that this is going to raise the national debt, and he wants more cuts. Yes. This is the richest guy on earth, wants more cuts in nutrition programs for hungry kids, in healthcare, in education. And what are you saying, which takes you to another outrage in the American system, is obviously he helps fund the Republican Party. So he said, if you don't go, in so many words, you don't go along with me, you know what, we're going to get rid of you. You're out of office. So much for democracy in the Republican Party.
Do you think, I'm just asking your former colleague, Senator Jon Tester, this. I mean, there are people who think basically doesn't cut enough, right? It doesn't screw people enough on Medicaid or SNAP, and are making noises about voting against them. How seriously do you take those noises from someone like Ron Johnson?
I think Ron is a serious guy. He doesn't look. Many of these people barely believe in government. I mean, you think I'm exaggerating?
No.
Government is an impediment to billionaires being able to do what they want. They want to build a factory and pollute a river or a lake. Hey, what is the problem? That's their right to do. They want to buy the American political system. Hey, that's their right. They're successful. So people like Johnson, believe very strongly that with Musk, that they want to bring down the national debt. They're certainly not going to go after the tax breaks for the rich. By the way, $150 billion more for the military which has not been able to complete a successful audit. They're not going to go after that. What does it mean? It means they'll continue the attacks against the working class.
Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, thanks for making some time for us tonight.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Bring in former Treasury official, Morning Joe economic analyst, our good friend Steve Ratner over at the Southwest Wall. Steve, good morning. Good to see you. Let's continue this conversation about the so-called big, beautiful bill and its impact on the national debt. What are you looking at there?
Well, look, it's a big bill. Whether it's beautiful or not, we can debate. But as you heard before, the challenge is that there are people who think it's too big. There are people who think there's other stuff that should be cut. And so it's a really tough situation for the president. But let's take a look at what the bill, as it was written in the House, would actually do. First of all, it's important to note that we're already, as I think everybody knows, starting with a really large deficit. Our deficit is almost $2 trillion right now. While it's projected to go down slightly, it would otherwise then keep climbing up to about between $2 and $2.5 trillion. That's if we do nothing. The big, beautiful bill you can look at two ways. As it is written, it would do this, so it would have the budget deficit still higher than we have. But there are a bunch of gimmicks in there in terms of making things expire that aren't really going to end up expiring. And so I think the real way to look at this big, beautiful bill is it would take the deficit out to $3 trillion in 2035. And that becomes a huge amount. And then you see what it does to the debt. So right now we're sitting here with $37 trillion of debt. Compared to a GDP, the whole size of our economy is only 30 trillion, meaning our debt is bigger than our economy. That's the only other time this has happened was in World War II. So we're starting with a huge debt load. And then no matter really what you do, because the deficit stays high, no matter what you do, the big, beautiful bill makes it worse. You could end up out here with $55 trillion of debt. So the debt growing faster than the economy, this becomes unsustainable, and this is what the deficit hawks are really focused on.
And Steve, already bigger than the economy is the national debt, and this would just add to that, as you say. This is a large conversation, I know, but just briefly, what are the risks to a debt that is larger than the economy?
Well, what you've seen happen in the last few weeks as this bill has been moving through Congress is periodic spurts of interest rates moving up. The federal government has to sell this debt periodically. It rolls over, it matures, they have to go out in the market and sell it. And the risk is that we pay higher and higher interest rates for our debt, and that in turn, as we'll look at in a few charts, squeezes out other kinds of spending and puts inordinate pressure on our debt and forces some really, really unpleasant things. At some point, reversing tax cuts when the market says it's enough. We're not going to keep financing these kinds of deficits. It's really a burden we're leaving to our children and our grandchildren, and that is an incredibly selfish act that we're doing.
All right, speaking of tax cuts, let's look to your second chart. These are, in your words, absolutely massive tax cuts, dwarfing anything we saw from the first Trump administration.
Yeah, so this bill, again, there's a bunch of gimmicks in it. You can look at it as a $2.4 trillion bill. You can look at it as a $4 trillion increase to the deficit. But compare it to all the stuff we've done in the last few years. The bipartisan infrastructure law looks puny compared to this. The rescue plan, half the size of this. The CARES Act, which was Trump's COVID rescue plan, $1.7 trillion. And here, Trump's signature tax bill from his first administration, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, $1.5 trillion. So compared to his last tax cut, we're talking about something that is massively different. Why is it so big? He wants to extend all the tax cuts that were set to expire in the last bill. This was the gimmick in the last bill. They use these gimmicks to make these bills look smaller because then they come back and extend the tax cut, increase the standard deduction, increase the child tax cut. And then these are a bunch of campaign promises that Trump made sort of out of nowhere in states and in places where it would be politically advantageous. No tax on overtime, no tax on car loan interest, no tax on tips and so forth. They want to increase defense spending. He promised no taxes on Social Security for seniors. You can't do that through this process, but he came up with a workaround to basically provide the same thing. And then there are the cuts. And this is what Elon Musk is on about, rescinding the IRA climate funds. This is the EV tax credit in here. And these are the Medicaid cuts, $700 billion, which have not only gotten criticism from Democrats, but even Republicans like Josh Hawley, a very conservative Republican, has said this can't happen. And so as we talked about in the last block, you've got people on both sides of this pushing in different directions, which is going to make this unbelievably difficult to get through the Senate. And then it has to go back to the House and be reconciled with the bill that they passed.
As you say, that last line, Medicaid cuts, is going to be a big problem. Let's go to your third chart. You say debt is difficult to tame. What are you looking at there?
Well, why did Elon Musk fail so spectacularly? The president had talked during the campaign about cutting $2 trillion. Elon talked about cutting $1 trillion. The final number is probably less than $150 billion, maybe $100 billion. And by the way, yes, people are dying because of that. That's been now well documented. But the reason it's so hard to cut is because so much of the budget is kind of off limits. Nobody wants to cut Medicare. Nobody wants to cut Social Security. You can't cut interest, obviously. People want to increase defense. Veterans benefits, probably not. Food stamps, maybe a little bit, something there. And then, of course, you have the Medicaid piece down here. But everything else that's left out of a $7 trillion budget is only about $1 trillion. You can't cut $2 trillion out of $1 trillion. You can't cut $1 trillion out of $1 trillion. And so that's why when Doge got in there, they found there really wasn't very much to do. But let's just say a word of what could have been, because we've now had 25 years of basic fiscal irresponsibility going back to the Bush tax cuts in 2001. And so if we had not increased discretionary spending faster than the economy, we could have increased it, just not as fast as we did. If we had not had all these tax bills, the Bush tax cuts and then the TCJA and so forth, the recession response, you could say we really had to do, but it costs a lot of money. But in any event, if we had not done this stuff, we still would have had a government that was growing, and we would have ended up in 2021 with essentially no debt. This was the missed opportunity. Now, because so much of the spending is constrained, now because we're paying so much interest, it's impossible to do something like this.
Morning, Joe. Economic analyst Steve Ratner, thank you very much for being on this morning, for those explanations.